Okay, folks, good evening, everybody. Thank you for signing up for the webinar this evening. So today's session, I'm going to be taking you through the very basic overview of physical fitness for camogie. I'm going to try and speak in nice, clear voice and use big words so I can pretend I know what I'm talking about. In terms of questions, there won't be a question answer at the end of this session. This is just to give you a very general brief overview of what physical fitness is, and then the 3 breakout rooms will go into more detail on the topics. Everyone in the breakout rooms will be able to answer any question that I could also answer. They're much cleverer than I am. So if you have any questions, you can just save them up and then wait and ask whoever's in your breakout room any questions. So feel free, obviously, to write down questions. But there won't be any time at the end of this, but the breakout room tutors, they will be able to answer any question that I've got here. So in terms of physical fitness for camogie, what are we looking at? In terms of the components of fitness, they've been kind of broken down by scientists and clever people into the following areas. You've got strength, speed, agility, power, endurance, all the kind of ones that you may or may not be familiar with. In its simplest possible way, we're looking to try and prepare our players for the demands of the game. So camogie requires players to perform repeated short, quick movements, moving in multiple directions and from a variety of start positions, with varying amounts of recovery. Sometimes you get a lot of recovery, sometimes you're walking around, sometimes you're sprinting really hard a few times. So it's quite varied. In addition, they must possess strength and flexibility attributes that allow them to obtain and maintain possession of the ball and execute the skills and tackle opponents. So as a sport, it's a fairly well-rounded sport in terms of the physical attributes that you need. You pretty much need everything that's on this list here in some way, shape, or form. One thing to note is that all these components of fitness, they're not exclusive to each other. Everything is very much interdependent on each other. For example, strength and power go together. You can't really have power without having the strength there first. And in terms of flexibility, you might be able to bend down and then you'll need some strength to get out of that position. So everything is interdependent, but for the sake of just simplifying things, we're going to look at a certain amount of components here when we do this. So general overview of that is there's a good few components of fitness required for camogie. We'll just go over the main ones that you need to try and make your athletes a little bit better at their sport and prepare them well as you can for that. So in terms of the other thing we're going to talk about is the principles of training. So we have the components, so we know these are the components that you need for camogie. You need all these things to be working. How you train them then comes down to the principles of training. So this the picture here is it's Greek mythology. I can't remember the name of the person off the top of my head, but they're looking at the principle of overload and the principle of progression. And both of these are hitting quite well in him carrying a big massive bull on his shoulders. So he starts off when the bull is just a baby and he's quite small, and then as the bull gets bigger he has to carry it, and then when he gets to the end he's quite big and muscular and the bull is massive. He's doing well to carry that. So it works quite well in terms of what we're talking about. So in terms of training any fitness quality you're looking for as a coach, at the very basic level you need to know is the 4 things here: frequency, intensity, time, and type. So any of the fitness qualities we talk about, whether it's speed or power or strength or whatever that may be, you can manipulate these 4 variables to try and progress everything we're doing. So frequency is very simple. It's just how often you do it. Do you do it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week? Do you do it every day? That's the first one. Intensity looks at how hard you're working. So is it a nice slow kind of slow paced session? Is it a really fast intense session? Are you asking them to lift light weights? Are you asking them to lift really heavy weights? Are you asking them to do lots of repetitions or just 1 or 2? So intensity is simplest way is how hard you are working in a session. So you've got how often you're working, how hard you're working. Time, very straightforward, is how long you're working for. Is it a short duration? Is it a long duration? And then the type is the type of exercise that you're using to try and bring about that fitness quality. So are you doing a circuit class? Are you doing a bodyweight circuit class? Are you using bands? Are you using weights? Is it a pitch session? Is it a game related thing? So just the kind of type of training that you're doing in terms of doing that. So and we'll go through that more as we talk about the actual qualities themselves. The principle of progression then, so overload. So to overload, in terms of overload and progression, it's necessary to provide a progressive heightening of the stressor for the body to adapt. So in the simplest possible terms is that for the body to adapt and get better at something, you need to stress it enough so it progresses, but you don't stress it too much or else it will break down. And that's what the bottom bit goes in there. So overload appropriately with adequate recovery will lead to improved performance. And in terms of injury prevention, that's a key one from a coaching point of view. If you try and push a player too far, too fast, they will break down. So if you go from, say, from the lockdown, doing absolutely nothing, and you put a team into 3 times a week, 3-4 times a week of running sessions, more than likely they will break down because they can't tolerate the load that's being put on them. So in terms of when you're manipulating your principles of training, it's just getting that balance between doing enough that you're going to just stress them enough so they can progress, but not stress them too much so they break down. And some of that, unfortunately, is trial and error. A lot of it is just being sensible about what you're doing. And we go through a bit more about that as we go. So in terms of the actual fitness components we're looking at, so we picked out the kind of 6 main ones that we're going to look for. So when we're talking about strength is one of the most important things we're going to talk about in this one. Strength is the maximal force that a muscle can generate. So it's the ability to produce force. So if an exercise, you're doing a press up, or in Camogie terms, you're doing a jab lift or tackling or resisting contact, that requires a degree of strength. So strength is moving something. Power is then the ability to apply that strength quickly. So it's speed times strength. So strength is the ability to produce force. Power is the ability to produce force quickly. So doing a press up would be a strength exercise. Doing a clap press up where you jump and clap your hands and come back down, that's a power exercise. And then in terms of just Camogie, again, sprinting, jumping, striking the ball as hard as you can, they are all power examples of power variables that you're going to look at. So those two are interdependent. Again, you need to have the strength first before you have the power. So there's no point going and doing power training if you don't have the strength and the core base to do it properly. In terms of endurance, they can be broken into muscular and cardiovascular endurance. So muscular is the ability of a muscle group to work for long periods. So the ability to do work. So repeatedly striking the ball, repeatedly tacking, so repeatedly going down to jab lift and get the ball off the ground, doing that over and over again, muscular endurance. Cardiovascular is the ability to of your heart and lungs to fuel your body. So it can get quite complicated because you've got aerobic, which is the long, slow stuff. You've got the sprint, which is the fastest 100% effort. And anaerobic kind of sits somewhere in the middle of kind of doing that. In Camogie, we need to work all 3 systems in its simplest possible thing. But in terms of how we do that in versus games versus drills, James touches on that in his session, so I won't go into that. But you just need to know that there's muscular endurance, which you can do in, say, a circuit session, or you've got cardiovascular endurance, which would be your running sessions or your games-based sessions if you're doing small-sided games. Speed, in the simplest possible way, ability to get from A to B in the shortest possible time. Very desirable trait. Speed is generally one of the top ones that we do. It's one of the hardest ones to train though, because in terms of what you need for speed, you need to be working maximally. So it's 100% effort, or close to kind of 90 to 100% effort for speed. You need to give long rest durations so your body is recovered in time to do that. If you don't give your body enough recovery, you'll slow down and it stops becoming speed. It becomes a bit more of an endurance session. Alan again goes into that a bit more detail, but the exact same is applicable to agility. So speed and agility are both maximal efforts for very short, sharp durations with long recovery times to get the best out of them. And Alan will go through that more in his session again in terms of doing that. Agility, there's also 2 parts of agility. You've got change of direction, which is I run from here to the 65-meter line and change direction. That's a pre-planned change of direction. I run to a line, I change, I come back. True agility would be reacting to external stimulus and involves making a decision. So that would be if Niall was standing in front of me and I would have to follow Niall wherever he goes. I would have to react to Niall. So that's when you've got 2 kind of different, you start off with change of direction and then you go on to the true agility, which is the external stimulus of that. Last ones we would look at would be mobility and flexibility. So mobility is the ability to move a limb or a joint through a range of motion. So there's a bit of control and strength involved in that. Flexibility would be the ability of a muscle to lengthen. So if you just kind of bend down to touch your toes, that would be flexibility. If you're flexible enough to do that, your muscles will let you get down there. For mobility, that's being able to lie on your back and lift your leg up and get it as high as you can go. So you say straight above your belly button, that would be mobility, because you have to have the strength and the control to move it. But again, those two are interdependent. If you don't have the flexibility, you can't lift your leg high enough. So it's fairly straightforward in that. In terms of just other things that we look at for this, so just touching back on the endurance part of things. So in terms of the endurance, muscular endurance, so muscular endurance, if you're working with children, it's not as much of a priority. If you're working for youths and adults, you want to really use that with body weight circuits as much as possible. You can then add in bands and say medicine balls and kettlebells at the very most if you wanted to, but it's very much starting with body weight to make sure you get the movement patterns correct for that. In terms of your cardiovascular endurance, the best way to be doing that would be for games, especially if you're working with children age group. It's not really a concern. That'll take care of itself in the fundamental movement skills that they do. If you're working with adolescents up to adults, then you're looking for small-sided games. So they are the easiest and best way to do it. And then you can use the FIT principle to make that more relevant to you. So easiest possible way for endurance, if you're working with adolescents or adults, is the bigger the pitch is, and with less numbers on it, it's more of a conditioning drill. So if it's a big pitch and there's less players, there's more space for them to cover, more space to move around, but it's not so intense. They've got a lot of room. They don't have to dodge as much. It's more of a pure fitness drill. When you make the pitch smaller with bigger numbers, it's a lot more intense. There's a lot more sharp turns and a bit of contact. So it's very much a kind of speed endurance session. So just manipulating your variables for how long you do it for, and how intense you make it, that can bring it on from a fitness point of view. So that's the easiest possible way in terms of doing that. James again covers more in terms of, do you use drills or do you use the games for that? Because there's variables for both in terms of that. So strength, why do we need strength? Strength is one of the most important physical attributes, and especially from a injury risk point of view and a skill performance point of view. So in terms of, it should form the basis for most S&C programs, and especially if you've got weaker athletes, they should focus on strength training first before progressing on to power training. And you just got some examples there of the benefits of it in terms of team sports athletes. So if you've got a stronger athlete, they benefit more from power training. The more powerful they are, the faster they go and the higher they jump, which is obviously desirable. In terms of general sports performance, jumping, sprinting, change of direction, all those things, it can help with the specific skills of the sport in terms of things like you can jab lift more effectively if you can lunge properly, little things like that, and then decreasing injury risk. So the stronger your muscles are, the higher workload they'll be able to tolerate, and the less likely they are to break down if you have a basic bit of strength. In terms of the actual movement patterns, so if you're working with, when you're starting to work with athletes and you want to get them a little bit stronger, the basic movement patterns are the way to go. So there's kind of 7 basic ones we work on. So squat is just your normal, just body weight squat. You've got a hip hinge, which is anything from a deadlift to an arabesque. That's something that Paul goes through later on. You've got your push and pull. So pushing would be a press up. Pulling would be a chin up or a pull up, or a ring row or a banded row if you have anything that you can row there. Obviously lunges, you've got your 1 foot, you've got your forward lunge, backward lunge, side lunge, those sorts of things. And then you've got what we call brace and twist. So the bracing would be, say, a plank variation. Twists would then be things like Russian twists or Palov press, where you're trying to resist an external force on that. And in terms of the misconception for the strength stuff, again, it doesn't make you big and slow unless you want it to. That's a very popular misconception in the GA, especially when you're starting off. The changes will very much just be within the body and within the muscle. They won't be getting bigger. They'll just start to move better, and everything will start to look better when you want to do. You just think every time you bend over, you do a deadlift. Every time you get up off a chair, you do a squat. So these are absolutely normal movements that we just try and incorporate into our into our sessions. And this is just an example of basic strength movements when you go down them. So it might look a bit scary, but you can literally you can YouTube any of these exercises using these descriptions, and it'll come up with ways to do it. So you've got an air squat, sumo squat, there you go. Then you've got all your deadlift variations. And all these movements should be done with 2 legs and 2 arms first, and then you can go on to 1 leg and 1 arm. So it's easier to go with 2 legs and 2 arms, harder to go with 1 arm. So that's, again, your intensity you're looking for in terms of you can manipulate that to make things a bit harder. Push-pull, again, vertical, so you can pressing things over your head, whereas a horizontal push would be a press up, for example. So you just want to make sure that they're getting a nice rounded experience. And in terms of other things, like in terms of bracing, you got your monster walks, partner carries, farmer walks, all that sort of stuff. So again, they're a little bit of fun for especially if you're working with a slightly younger age group in terms of doing that. And in terms of putting it all together, so last little bit we look at is putting it all together. So in terms of all the stuff I've talked about, so you've talked about the components of fitness that we use. You can talk about how to manipulate them to get them better, and a few examples of how you do them and why they're important. In terms of working with the child age group, then the FMS, so the fundamental movement skills, they cover absolutely everything that you need to. So agility, balance, coordination, run, jump, throw, catch, pass, kick. They are the main things. If you're working with children, that's all you need to cover. There's nothing else. That's all you need to worry about in terms of a coach. Just making it fun and using as much games as possible with kids, especially, and anyone starting off, really. Shorter distances, shorter durations for the intensity. If you're moving on to youth and adults, there's a couple of the main structure here is fairly straightforward. The Camogie warm-up to start with. Paul will cover that, and that covers absolutely everything. Every component of fitness is in there, really, apart from conditioning, and endurance and conditioning is in there. So that's a great way to start off, especially if you're new to it and you're not quite sure. Camogie warm-up. So then you're putting in some speed work, which Alan will talk about, jumping and throwing, which is basic plyometric stuff, and that's the easiest way to work on power, jumps and throws, and your basic bodyweight exercises, which we went through: the squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, brace, rotate. If you have them, you can use bands and kettlebells and medicine balls to progress everything, but they're absolutely not essential. You can get through everything you want just by using their own body. And if you're going to work on endurance, try games first. You can also do drills if you want to. Probably be easier if you have an S&C coach for that. And then James, again, it goes through the benefits, the pros and cons of doing both. Again, going way into more advanced than the adults, progress onto gym work only when bodyweight mastery occurs. So again, they can do all the same movement patterns in the gym once they've mastered their own body weight, and only then. And again, this is fluid. So you might have some adults who need to do bodyweight stuff because they can't do it. You might have some teenagers who can go into the gym and move some heavy weights. But it all depends on their mastery of the body weight and the very basic movement patterns, which we talked about later on. So that's me finished talking. You'll be delighted to know. And this is just a wee summary page for you. So we train a range of physical qualities to prepare the players. Child age players best served with the fundamental movement skills. Youth to be introduced to the basic techniques of speed, body weight, plyos, and then adults can go into gym only when they're ready. It's a sliding scale, and everything is based on the player's capacity to handle it first. And everything is then manipulated by the FIT principle. So the frequency, the intensity, the time and type, that makes it a little bit harder or a little bit easier depending on what you want from them.